Hello, Year 8. This is going to be our third lesson on fractions of the week. Today we are going to be looking at how we interchange between fraction and equivalent decimals. So the first thing that I would like you to just think about for a moment, great if you've managed to print out a sheet, is do you know all of these fractions already? The top 7 as decimals. It's very likely we would discuss this in year 7. It's very likely, certainly for my class, that I would have asked you to learn some of these. Some of these fractions also came up in our first lesson where we might have seen some decimal equivalents. So just before I read out all of the answers for you to fill in, you could just pause the video here and see how many of these you could populate on the sheet by yourself. So let's start with 1/2. That's one everyone should know. 1/2 is 0.5. 1/4, 0.25. 1/10. Well, it's exactly what it sounds like on the tin. It is a 1 in the 10th column, 0.1. Or you could think of it as 1 divided by 10, which of course is 0.1. 1/5 or 2/10 is 0.2. 3/4, 0.75. 1/3, the interesting one. It is 0.33333 going on forever, or 0.3 recurring. And 1/8, that came up, I believe, in our first lesson, and I mentioned that it was 0.125. All of those you really need to learn. So if there were some that you didn't know, think of the ones that you already knew, try and learn the next ones. That could be a little task to be thinking about over the weekend. Now, I've got a little section called Cheap Tricks, and the reason why I call it Cheap Tricks is because if you know all of these ones, mathematically you should be able to work out all of these others. 4/5 is just 4 lots of 1/5. So it's 4 lots of 0.2, which is 0.8. 2/3 is just 1/3 doubled. So if 1/3 is 0.3 recurring, 2/3 is 0.6 recurring. And 3/8 is just 3 lots of 1/8. And 0.125 times 3 is 0.375. Now, as we work through the work today, do not forget about all these fractions that you already know, because these could be some potential shortcuts when answering some of today's questions. So I said we're going to be able to interchange fluently between fractions and decimals. So we're going to look at how we do it both ways. How do we go from decimals to fractions? How do we go the other way around, fractions to decimals? So starting with decimals to fractions, the easiest way to think of this is the number of decimal places gives you an indication of what the denominator should be. We are going to think of these things as equivalent calculations where we might be dividing something by 10, 100, or possibly even 1,000. We also might be in a situation where we have to cancel some of these fractions down. So for example, 0.7 we know is 7 divided by 10. So it is just 7/10. 0.35 with 2 decimals is going to be a fraction over 100. That is the same as 35 divided by 100. Because you can imagine that these 2 digits have moved 2 places to make it a decimal number. So it is the same as 35 over 100. However, that fraction can cancel down because we can divide the top and bottom by 5, making it 7 over 20. 0.75. Don't start messing around with this if it's one that we already know. We know that 0.75 is 3/4. 0.16. Well, once again, that is going to be a fraction out of 100. But of course it simplifies. If you can't do the simplification in one step, then simplify your fraction over multiple steps. But I can see both of these numbers divide by 4, so it is 4 over 25. 0.78, again, is a fraction out of 100. 2 decimals, a fraction out of 100. Can 78 over 100 be simplified? Both of these numbers are even, so we can divide by 2. 39 over 50. Now, 0.008. This is a number that has 3 decimals. So this is going to be equivalent to 8 divided by 1,000. So the fraction is 8,000. What is that simplified? Well, I can actually divide all of these numbers by 8. But you might want to do it in several steps. You might say, oh, I'll halve 4 over 500. I'll halve again 2 over 250. But if you divided by 8 straight away, you would have got to 1 over 125. So work with the questions as you feel confident. If you can jump straight to the end, even better. Now, you might see some questions today that have some whole ones. The best way of thinking about these questions is just leaving the whole ones alone and then looking at the decimal. So for example, 1.25, we recognise the one whole one, but we also recognise that 0.25 is a quarter. So this one is just 1 1/4. Similarly with 8.48, I can see I've got 8 whole ones. But now let's think about the 0.48. Well, that is 48 hundredths. Does 48 hundredths cancel down? Yes, it does. I've still got the 8 whole ones, but both of these numbers can be divided by 4. So that is 8 and 12 over 25. So that was decimals to fractions. Let's look at it the other way round. Well, we saw how easy it was to turn a decimal into a fraction by writing it as 10 over 10 or over 100 or over 1,000. So we're going to do the exact same idea by turning a fraction into an equivalent fraction with a nice denominator like that. So for example, 3 over 20, I could find an equivalent fraction where the denominator is 100 by multiplying by 5. So that is the same as 15 over 100 or 15 divided by 100. Well, we know when you divide a number by 100, you move the digits 2 places. So that is now 0.15. Similarly, I can multiply the top and the bottom by 2 to make this one 100. This is 18 over 100, which must be 0.18. Can I make this one 100? Yes, by timesing by 4. What is 17 times 4? Well, that is 68. So we have 0.68. 9 over 30. Well, 9 over 30, I can't see a nice way of turning that into 100. Could I turn it into 1,000? No. So how am I going to do this one? Well, actually, the fraction 9 over 30 can be simplified, can't it? I can divide both of these by 3. So that is the same as 3/10. That is a decimal that I do know. 0.3. So very important. Sometimes you might need to cancel the fraction in order to see how you can make the denominator 10, 100, or even 1,000. 8 1/3. Well, hang on a second. A third is one that we know. So I don't need to mess around. 8 whole ones still, and a third is 0.3 recurring. So I can write it as 8.3 with a dot on the 3. 3 and 7 over 250. Ouch. Well, let's just leave the 3 alone because it's 3 whole ones. There's no way I can turn this into a fraction out of 100, but I can definitely turn it into a fraction out of 1,000. I'm timesing top and bottom by 4. So that is 28 out of 1,000. And 28 out of 1,000, 28 divided by 1,000 would be 0.028 by itself. But I've also got the 3 whole ones, so together it must be 3.028. I've just said at the bottom, do remember, from time to time, you might be asked to use a calculator to turn a fraction into a decimal, and remember that we can do that by dividing the numerator by the denominator. So, there are questions on the PowerPoint, so do go back to my instructions. If you are going to have a go at level 1, I have put a link to a copy of this sheet if you want to print it out. I know my class are very used to doing these sentence type questions, and if you tried writing or drawing them out, they are an absolute pain. So if you want to do this activity, print it out. That would be the best way to do it. Of course, remember to find time to check your answers at the end, and remember that you can ask any questions in the Ask the Teacher channel.